Welcome to Season 2, Episode 3 of Tech Talk Thursdays. Today, we're going to take a fascinating look at the Season Group and how they expanded their footprint globally. There are many facets to opening a factory in a new territory. Here to discuss some of the areas you might not have thought about is Carol Hung, President and CEO of Season Group.
Great to see you, Carol. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Trevor. Good seeing you again.
Yeah. So give us, for our viewers that are not that familiar with Seasons Group, give us a quick potted history. You started out in Hong Kong, you expanded into Dongguan, Malaysia, then over into the Americas and other parts of the world. So tell us a little bit about your journey in terms of expansion and what you learned along the way.
Okay. Well, yeah. So like we said, 1975, so that's a long time ago, 45 years. And a lot has changed back then, where we started off as a wire harness manufacturer and slowly expanded into injection molding and then PCBAs eventually to becoming the box build provider that we are today. And I think we talked about this as well previously, where there seem to be a lot of wire harness manufacturers that have taken that progression. And I think a lot of it has to do with a lot has to do with margins, right? My father always said, back in the good old day, a stack of margins, the A thick, would have been $100 US. And by the time I took over, that same stack of wire harness was maybe 10 cents only. So the price of the commodity has dropped a lot, and I think it has forced contract manufacturers to offer more value add to their customers by offering plastics and by offering PCBAs and full box build. And I think when I took over the business, we had a family friend that was very against the whole idea. He was on the OEM side, and he says, being in the EMS industry, it's a herd mentality. It's a very difficult lifestyle because you're always chasing the lowest cost labor. You're always going to be moving around, which is true. We went from Hong Kong back in 1975 when it was known as low cost. And then at that time, actually, our first move wasn't into China. The first move was to Malaysia. We didn't go into China until after Malaysia because at that time, there was a lot of sensitivity between Hong Kong and China with the handover just being announced. So we start off in Hong Kong, then Malaysia. Then we dabbled into Shenzhen area. Once we gained confidence in the Chinese government and the open economy, we invested into our Dongguan facility in 1997. And that's our flagship facility now. Our majority of our revenue is stemming from that facility. But when I took
the majority of your business then Chinese based, or does it get manufactured in Dongguan to go to other parts of the world?
It's all exported. I think for us, we're still trying to figure out how to break into the Chinese market. I think this year has been the first year that we've actually focused on Chinese sales. But beforehand, it's all been Europe and the US.
Right. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, full disclaimer, I can barely speak Mandarin. So it makes it tough for me to sell to the Chinese customers. But yeah, one thing after China, when I took over, we realized the need for a global footprint because even by the time I took over, Chinese labor had gone up considerably. We can see that it won't be the long-term solution for everyone. So I pushed for the global expansion, making use of Malaysia as a EMS point, and then pushing into the US and Mexico as well too. And it's been an interesting journey because each site's different.
So was that a marketing strategy or was that a risk-averse management strategy?
I think it started off as a marketing strategy. I think we said that we need to be able to tell our customers we're global because we foresaw that it has to be China plus one for a long time ago. But I think we were still ahead of the time for our customers. They didn't feel the need to move to Malaysia yet or to Mexico yet. So all along we've been saying, guys, you want to check out pricing from Malaysia? Do you want to check out pricing from Mexico? And they were hesitant up until two 3 years ago, once the new president in the U.S. came on board. I think that really stimulated the move towards Mexico and China and Malaysia.
Yeah, yeah. You must have had quite a rough ride with all the supply chain issues with the tariffs and that sort of thing going on.
Yeah, I think the biggest issue with the tariffs had always been not knowing what the tariffs would be until after they land. And I think a lot of the OEMs might not understand that because for the components themselves, a lot of the component manufacturers, they have multiple points. So for the same SKU, they could be manufacturing Thailand and China. And as you place a PO to component distributors, they're not going to be able to tell you where that particular batch will be from until it arrives. And you can't really specify, I want this SKU manufactured in Thailand. You place a PO for the SKU itself. So a lot of times we don't know what the tariff is until after it's arrived. And then we have to give a bill to our customer saying, this is the tariff that we have to pay.
That's a very interesting point because it's one of the things that's driven the growth of online RFQ systems and these digital bomb systems that are out there, because they're able to make some sort of risk assessment and know which country is the country of origin for the device. So you're able to sort of predict that risk a little bit better. But there's been a huge increase in that during COVID in these last few months.
Definitely.
In digital sourcing, for sure.
Well, that's assuming that the component manufacturer has only one site for manufacturing. So a lot of them are still trying to transition out of China right now. So we're getting still dual batches still. So, but having that software has been a blessing for sure. It's very easy for us to find out earlier on where there's a risk possibly.
Right, exactly. So looking at your total landed cost of goods equation, when you're making these decisions about moving or opening up a new facility somewhere, how much of it is still labor and in that decision?
I think labor is the starting point only. And I think that was the mistake that we may have had in Mexico, where in Mexico, it was a greenfield operation. So completely brand new site for us. We just went and said, let's go to Reynosa because it's closest to the US border. I don't think enough research had been done overall in the total operating cost of a Mexican facility, where certainly the rent plays a big part. And rent isn't necessarily cheaper than the US. I think the electricity costs aren't necessarily cheaper than the US. So I think from a total landed cost standpoint, comparing facilities between China, Malaysia, Mexico, and the US, you can't just look at labor. You have to look at a lot of auxiliary costs as well too, including the effect of the labor law on the labor cost itself. It's not just
what do you know now that you didn't know then?
Well, first off, I think the fact that we have facilities in China, Malaysia, and Mexico, we've understood now the power of the local legislation on labor and labor unions, as an example, where I think in the beginning, we weren't really aware that there's actually 3 types of labor unions in Mexico. The 3 types being white, yellow, and red unions.
White, yellow, and red. Okay,
yes.
What's the difference between the 3?
Well, the white unions, it's known as the paper union. So a lot of the companies are able to operate without actually working with a true union. It's a union on paper only. Whereas a red union is one that's an actual true union, where it's a federal union that reports back to Mexico City. And generally speaking, the red union is able to negotiate a much harder stance against the manufacturers than a white union would. And what we didn't realize was that certain regions had a predominantly red union presence, and certain other ones would be more white union based.
Right. What's a yellow union?
I think the yellow union is somewhere in between.
Okay.
So not as strict as a red union, and it's more flexible itself, whereby I think right now with the new USMCA agreement, which I believe is known as the TMEC in Mexico, there's been a paragraph in there that states that all workers have a right to select the type of unions that they want representing them. So essentially, it's trying to push manufacturers to move away from white union representation and more towards at least the the yellow union representation and red union representation.
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah.
Try first. Don't just say, I can't. Try and find a way to do it.
We will exceed your expectations.
Nice to meet you. We are Omron.
You know, you have to make yourself a bit familiar with all these laws across wherever territory you're working in. You know, it's like we talked a little bit before we went on camera about the unions also, and the labor costs when you're letting people go in Europe, for example, where you have to give them very long severance pay. How has that played into some of the places that you've worked, that you're operating?
Yeah, I think that's the area that we were never in-depth knowledge, did not have in-depth knowledge about previously. I think that's where a lot of companies should put a lot of effort into researching, especially for EMS side of business, because in our line of business, it's very seasonal, based on the customer's seasonality too. For example, this year, a lot of our customers' orders dropped considerably. Some of them peaked considerably too, but overall more dropped than peaked. And as such, we as an EMS manufacturer, we have to keep our direct labor costs between a certain percentage to stay in the black. But with restrictive severance requirements, it makes it very tough for us to do that. So having a full knowledge of that beforehand, I think it's important, because our facilities in Mexico, Malaysia, China, each have its own difference in terms of severance requirements. In China, for example, you have what's known as the N or the N+1 or 2N requirements, N being months per year of payments. So in a good year, for example, for the Chinese economy, the government tends to be more employee protective. So they'll, if things go to court, you'll end up paying 2N or 3N. So that's 2 months per year or 3 months per year severance. So it gets very expensive. But this year, with it being a down year for the entire economy, the government's been very understanding for employers. So it's been closer to N, for example. Whereas in Mexico, the basis is after a 3-month probation, you get 3 months severance no matter what. So if you let someone go after the 4th month, for example, you have to pay that person at least 3 months severance. Whereas the possibility of extending probation, for example, it's not possible in Mexico. Whereas in China, Malaysia, if someone is on the borderline, then we'll know, okay, we can extend the probation and the law would work for us in that sense. But in Mexico, you can't extend probation. It's either he's good or she's good, or he's good or she's good, or not. So we have to make a very hard cut on that 3 months. So in a sense, it's making us be more diligent within those 3 months of analysis, determining whether or not that candidate, that employee, is a good fit for us.
Does it also make you more diligent in the types of jobs that you take on for that particular location, or the work that you actually put into that location?
Yes, certainly. I think what ends up happening for Mexico, for example, it accentuates the fact, because the labor and non-direct labor is so expensive. One thing we need to focus in on is low mix, high volume work. So we're pushing more higher volume work to Mexico as opposed to China, whereas China ends up being a high mix, low volume country, which is unique. I think previously everyone thought Foxconn and Flextronics were doing millions of pieces in China, but right now, because still the cost of engineering in China is very competitive. I think for us to hire a very good firmware engineer in China, we're talking about maybe $2,000 US. So as a company, we realized, oh, maybe we need to structure our business differently, where we have more engineering resources, more supply chain talent, for example, in the China area, and then use these satellite sites as a satellite site to do more volume build and more control from our China facility.
Makes sense. Makes sense.
Yeah.
I want to change the subject a little bit now. I mean, obviously, you've based in Hong Kong, you've had quite an exposure to the COVID virus, and one of the biggest things in an EMS company is protecting your workforce. As a Chinese company, you obviously had also the experience of SARS many years ago, and that would have brought in a certain amount of health protection at that point. How have you found COVID for you, and how has your experience helped with your other facilities around the world?
Yeah, I think 2003, year of the SARS, was a big impact for us as a company. We were actually recognized by our local government for being one of the best prepared in our region. And the benefit for us as a company is that the same people who managed the company back in 2003 are still managing the company today. So it was just going back to instincts in the sense, oh, what's the very first thing we need to do? And the very first thing we knew we needed to do was face mask. We didn't wait for any sort of scientific proof or the experts or WHO saying whether or not face masks were needed. We just kind of knew that it's a good thing to have. So when this first broke out in January, we quickly scrounged for the face mask. But as you say, that we had experience, and the entire Asia had experience of SARS as well. So the entire Asia region was looking for said face mask. Because a lot of these factories for face mask factory were off during Chinese New Year's, they couldn't locate supply. So it created such a spike in demand. So we ended up finding, as we mentioned last week, 400,000 face masks in Mexico that that expected China to use. So that was the very first instinct we have. And as a goal for the company, our very first goal was 0 cases of COVID in our China facility. That was what we aimed for. And I'm proud to say it's still true today. We've had 0 cases of COVID. So being one of the very first sites to be hit with COVID, we've had 0 cases there. So it goes to testament to the team and how they managed the whole situation in China. And I think the fact that
do your workers in the China facility, do they live on campus or do they live outside?
Yeah, and I think that's a big key too. The fact that they live on campus made a big difference. So we control the environment 24/7. And the government, first thing they mandated was, even if you lived off campus, you need to move into campus if you want to open the factory. So they didn't want to have people bringing in the virus into such an enclosed space, because they're living 8 to a room. So it's very easy to explode, like it did in Singapore, for example. But then the fact that the Asian community was so attuned to the need to isolate, we weren't very worried about them going off and having a party, for example, during this time frame. Whereas, unfortunately, our other regions, they not having that exposure to SARS before, they didn't take it as seriously. So in the factory, we did all the precautions that we needed to do. Cleaning shoes before entering the facility, face mask, sanitization, hands and the floors and the workspace, did all of that good stuff. But as they left the office, we weren't able to control that as much. And unfortunately, that resulted in a few cases in our San Antonio and Mexico sites.
Really?
So, that's the failure on our part, not educating well enough.
Yeah. My last question, of course, is a bit more current. There's been some recent changes in the status of Hong Kong with regards to the United States. They now claim that they're treating it the same way as they're treating mainland China. Has that made any material difference to your business?
It hasn't made a material difference to our business, especially from an EMS standpoint. But what we have noticed is certainly banking and also the IT companies, a lot of them have looked to relocate to other regions, for example, Singapore, because they're concerned about the need to divulge information to the Chinese government, for example. But I think a lot of it has been overblown and politicized in a sense, where previously all these companies had operations in mainland China itself. So for them to now be concerned about Hong Kong, not necessarily well-founded. There was the most recent change in the U.S. Rules where Hong Kong production is now deemed made in China as well, which is unique in that Hong Kong doesn't actually manufacture much of anything. So I think it's more symbolic, more than actual detrimental to Hong Kong itself. Although I think it does change Hong Kong's plans before, where previously the Hong Kong government were giving a lot of what do you call it, incentives for increasing Industry 4.0 and manufacturing in Hong Kong. So they're promoting a lot of semiconductor manufacture here in Hong Kong, actually. But I think now that might change as a result of this law. But from a EMS standpoint, it hasn't changed much. I think from a COVID-19 standpoint, and the national security law in the U.S. Issue has caused a change in the real estate prices, for sure. We do see commercial real estate dropping in prices. So from a rental standpoint, it's actually cheaper to operate a business here in Hong Kong now compared to before, which is a shame because it's a good thing, but we own our building, our offices here, so it doesn't really help us, unfortunately.
So you're in the wrong side of that argument.
Wrong side,
yeah. So, well, it's it's absolutely fascinating talking to you, Carol, and I could probably go on for another half hour, but we've got to end it there. And I want to thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Trevor.
What a great interview that was. On the topic of EMS manufacturer, product from Global SMT and Packaging is EMS Sharppool. This is a group of over 50 EMS companies that have agreed to work with Global SMT and Packaging and have provided a list of all the PCB assembly equipment and materials that they're intending to buy over the next 18 months. The difficulties imposed by the COVID-19 pandemic have made it impossible for these companies to attend trade shows or even to allow reps, in many cases, access to their factories. Global SMT and Packaging is acting as the eyes and ears for these companies by providing a series of professionally produced videos detailing the features and benefits of many of the latest pieces of equipment in the market. If you're an EMS vendor, come and join us to include your products in the Sharppool. The manufacturers who look at your products will tell you in a closed survey what they like about your product and what they don't like about it, and what follow-up they would like from you. So don't miss the opportunity to be part of the biggest feeding frenzy in the industry. Visit globalsmt.net to find out more. And that's it for this week. Next week, we'll be talking to Walt Custer, an industry icon who is retiring at the end of the month, and we will take a look at his life and his legacy. Till then, stay safe and have a great weekend.
Global SMT and Packaging opens the windows of the world to bring you the latest news and technologies from Munich, from Bangalore, from Shanghai, from San Diego.